The waiver wire in week 4 is not strong compared to what we've seen so far this year, so do not fall into the trap of grabbing people that are 1 week wonders that don't end up actually putting any points up, and you went ahead and dropped some players that are actually valuable. Lucky for you, in this video I will be going over all the players we cannot be adding in this week's waiver wire, as well as a list of players at the end of the video that are safe to drop by this point. So make sure to stick around to the end for that, and hit that like button while we do get into this video. It helps me out as a person and as a creator a ton, and be subscribed because I'm the only person on YouTube that'll give you both sides of the ball and who not to add and who to add, because I did just drop a waiver add video yesterday. But the resurgence of Kmet is back, and I do not know why we keep falling for this. And before we get into all of the hate comments, I get it, I understand. He put up 25.7 fantasy points last week. For the tight end position, that's pretty much the best you can get. He's also been increasing his snaps comparatively to Gerald Everett. And if you've been around my page for long enough, you know that was the main issue with Kmet. And you look at the numbers from week 1 to week 3, he actually jumped from 48% of the snaps all the way to 81 this week. So you look at all of this and say, okay, he's increasing his snaps, his fantasy points went up, he's being used in the offense. How is he not a good add? The reason for this, Caleb Williams had 52 pass attempts in week 3. That is insane. I don't know what's going on with the Bears coaching staff. I don't know what's going on with the team in general. 52 pass attempts is absolutely wild. Almost 400 passing yards, and they still lost. But that just shows our relative ceiling and floor for Kmet in this offense in general. When we don't have Keenan Allen playing in this offense, you're going to get a little bit more usage. But to that fact, there is so much target competition here. Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore. You also have DeAndre Swift out of the backfield. The only way Kmet continues to have 5 targets a game or somewhere around that range is if Caleb Williams continues to have 50-ish passing attempts, which isn't going to happen every single week. If you look at all of this target share of the entire team combined comparatively, you have Rome with 11 targets, you have DJ Moore with 10, you have Kmet with 11, you have Swift with 4 out of the backfield. So the individual target shares for all of these players isn't necessarily that different. It's just on a larger scale because there was so much passing volume. Now, if you're super desperate at tight end, I can understand going to pick him up. It's similar to the Hunter Henry situation where he put up 100 yards, he had a really good game, and then he comes back down to earth. We saw that with him specifically last year. Kmet is kind of the same situation, but a little bit worse because there's so much more target competition here. But he does have a pretty favorable schedule the next 2 weeks. He gets the Rams and the Panthers, so if you want to hold on to him for 2 weeks just to see, you can go ahead and do that. I just don't think it's worth your time. But if we're talking about wasting time, do not go out and put a waiver claim or any fab on Jalen Nailor. He had a good game in week 3, 12 fantasy points, and he's actually averaging 12 fantasy points a game through 3 weeks as well, which is pretty decent. He's seeing a ton of snaps as well. That's the good news. But the bad news is that he's averaging 2.5 receptions a game, and he's had a touchdown in every single one of his games, inflating his fantasy numbers. So the underlying numbers aren't there, but there's still more to this. You can look and say, well, there's a good amount of non-target volume wide receivers that are pretty decent. You look at Rashid Shaheed, he's the wide receiver 24 through 3 weeks. He's also averaging 2 receptions a game. And then you look at what is inevitably going to happen. He saw 75% of the snaps, the highest that he's ever seen this season. 0 receptions. He had a bust, no points. And that's just what you get with these wide receivers that don't see target consistency, whether that's the play style that they have, the role in the offense. You're going to ride those highs, but you're also going to die with those lows. And Jalen Nailor is not a high enough caliber player to be riding on those highs that aren't going to be really there, because his highs have been a touchdown every single week, but only averaging 12 fantasy points. If you take out that touchdown every single week, he's only averaging 6 points a week. That, on top of the fact that his success is relatively artificial with Jordan Addison being out again. He's been out since week 1, but Addison is considered day-to-day to come back in week 4 against the Packers, and if that does happen, there's going to be absolutely no value for Jalen Nailor and be even more boom bust than he already is now. The Vikings have looked good through 2 weeks. They're doing way better than I expected them to, and they're 22nd in passing volume. So if Jalen Nailor is not going to see more than 60% of the snaps as the wide receiver 3 in an offense that isn't top passing attempts, I don't see the need to go do that and waste a spot on our roster, especially if there's other guys like Braylon Allen, Tyler Algier, some handcuff running backs you can pick up and hold that actually have season-long value, or some guys that are valuable right now week to week, which again, I went into in my videos about the top waiver wire ads. Go ahead and check that out later after this video. And another player that we are going to have to leave on the waiver wire if he is there for you is Cam Akers. And this isn't for the reason you think it is. You think I'm going to say, oh, he had 9 fantasy points, he got saved by a touchdown, he didn't get that much usage, whatever, which is true, but not the reason why. You can't always isolate running back metrics to gauge if it was a successful fantasy day or fantasy future for them. And the reality of it is, it was not Cam Akers' fault that he did not have a good game this week, outside of that touchdown, obviously. If we're looking at usage, this Texans team was just terrible. CJ Stroud should have had 3 interceptions. He only had 2. Could have been 4. Like, he had a really bad game. It just comes down to, if you can't move the ball, you're not going to have a successful run game, which is why Cam Akers only saw 9 carries for 21 yards. That 2.3 yards per carry is a little bit worrisome. That receiving touchdown did save him. He is only rostered in 50% of leagues still, so there is a chance he's out there for the waivers for you right now. If he does get put on the waivers after this week, don't pick him up though. The bigger issue is that he only saw 43% of the snaps compared to Dare Ogunbowale, who also saw 42% of the snaps. So that kind of kills that RB1 workhorse arc that people were expecting him to be on, because we had Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce injured this week. Now, to be fair, Ogunbowale didn't have any usage for the time that he was actually on the field, but if he's going to be in that offense with Akers when all these other running backs are injured, there really is no path for upside when Mixon and Pierce come back healthy again. And in a perfect world, or I guess unperfect, if Joe Mixon were to miss the entirety of the season, you'd have Pierce, Ogunbowale, and Akers. Now let's get Pierce out of there. Let's say he was injured for the rest of the season as well. You'd still have Akers and Ogunbowale in this backfield. Now in that case, maybe he's worth an add. But that doesn't matter because Mixon's going to be coming back in week 4, hopefully, and Dameon Pierce is also on his way back too. So his 1 week wonder week was this weekend. He got saved by a touchdown, only put up 9 points. Keep him on the waiver wire. He should not be rostered in 50% of leagues. But a guy that actually has season-long upside and has some validity to add, I don't think we should be going through and doing it, is Tre Tucker. And this does suck because he is a good wide receiver talent. I do like him as a player. It just comes down to offensive opportunity. In week 3, he had 22.6 fantasy points on 97 yards and a touchdown. That's great in a Raiders offense. The only issue is that it was against a Panthers defense, which allows top 10 points to opposing wide receivers. It's not very great. And the toughest coverage and defensive coordination is on Davante Adams, maybe even Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers too. None of that is inherently bad for his season-long value, but the competition part is similar to what we were talking about with the Bears and Kmet. You have Davante Adams, you have Jacoby Myers. They both combined for 18 targets. You also have Brock Bowers, who is going to just increase his usage and snaps as the season goes on. He's already had a pretty successful year, and you have Michael Mayer. It just comes down to the fact there isn't enough room in this offense for him to be fantasy viable, and the Raiders do have one of the toughest fantasy football schedules for the wide receivers for the rest of the year here. So it's kind of on the way out. Another guy that's been seeing a good amount of interest from this week specifically, and a team in general that's been moving up people's radars, is the Steelers and Calvin Austin. And I get this one too. He put up 19.5 fantasy points, 95 yards, and a touchdown. Justin Fields could actually throw the ball for once this week. He had a 78% completion percentage. That's pretty good considering it was against a Chargers defense, which is considered to be one of the better ones in the NFL. And that was on 30 pass attempts. It wasn't like he only completed 10. But this offense is just too unpredictable. Like Fields with the Bears, you don't know what you're going to get. He's going to run a lot, make him a decent fantasy quarterback on his own, but offense-wise, you don't know what he can support. We have George Pickens as the wide receiver 1 in this offense as always. Yes, his role is a little bit different than some target volume guys, but Austin was the wide receiver 3 in this depth chart before Van Jefferson got injured in this game early in the first quarter. He was out for the rest of the game, so he saw more targets because of that, but he only played 54% of the snaps, despite Van Jefferson missing the entire game. That's maybe 10% more than he averages for the rest of the 2 weeks this season. You also have Roman Wilson not playing in this offense yet, so once both of those guys come back, it's going to be pretty bad for everybody in this offense but George Pickens, and even he is pretty boom or bust at this point. But looking at a quarterback that is a 100% complete trap, and I know all of you guys are too smart to even do this, so I will make it quick. As a Commanders fan, we are not going through and picking up Taylor Heineke. Justin Herbert is dealing with that same high ankle sprain that he was dealing with earlier in the season, which is a little bit worrisome for him. Not too bad because I know most people aren't going to be starting Justin Herbert in their lineups anyways as their QB1, but that makes Taylor Heineke have to start this week. Now, I don't think Justin Herbert's actually going to miss enough time for this to be an issue. Taylor Heineke still isn't a great plug-and-play player for this week against the Chiefs. He's going to throw 2 interceptions if he does end up starting, and he doesn't really have the wide receiver help to make him a fantasy viable guy. This team is a run-first offense, and their defense is pretty good, so they play relatively slow. He's not a guy we want to be going through and picking up, especially when they get in the red zone. They're going to run the ball a lot. There's no point to throw it. So that's even if Taylor Heineke ends up starting. And as for some players we can go through and drop, number 1 is Zamir White. I mean, this is pretty obvious at this point. I knew coming into the season, he wasn't a pass catcher. He was pretty much dependent on red zone touchdowns. How often are the Raiders going to get in the red zone? But if I told you that he would be the RB 48 through 3 weeks, I would be completely lying to you. This is so bad. He's splitting snaps with Alexander Mattison. He saw 22% of the snaps last week. Until we can have some kind of consistency, I don't want anything to do with it, and I don't think that's ever going to happen. He is completely boom bust as far as his snap percentage goes. Not even usage on the field. Jalen Polk is also another guy if you are holding on to him in the end of your bench, unless you're in a dynasty league or something like that. He can be dropped as well. He's averaging 55% of the snaps through 3 weeks. He hasn't had one game over 60% of the snaps, and he's still behind Demario Douglas, Hunter Henry in the depth chart of targets per game through 3 weeks. Until you see a guy like Tyquan Thornton or KJ Osborne decrease their snaps and Jalen Polk increases his snaps, he's not going to be valuable. There's better options on the waivers that we can actually get value from. this week and moving on into the future. Now, you do have to be aware that rookie wide receivers usually start to pick it up later in the season, but when you have Jacoby Brissett, maybe Drake May can come in and give him some value, but until something like that happens, there's no point to roster him here. Some other guys you can go through and drop if you do have them: Deshaun Watson, Donta Foreman, Mike Williams, any of those guys, make sure to get them off your roster. But thank you guys for watching this video. I will see you guys in the next one coming soon about trade targets and some potential stash players coming later in the week I don't want you guys to miss.